My name is Serena Walsh, and I never imagined 20 years of loyalty would end with my husband humiliating me in public and throwing me out like I was disposable. What he didn't know was that one quiet decision would unravel everything he controlled. Stay with me until the end. And before we begin, tell me where you're watching from, and hit subscribe. If you believe betrayal should never go unanswered, I didn't know that night would end my marriage. I thought it was just another obligation. Another room I had to smile through for his sake. The hotel ballroom in Naperville was packed, all white linens and low conversation. The kind of event where everyone pretends they're relaxed while scanning the room for status. My husband's colleagues were everywhere, their spouses, a few clients. Our daughter sat 2 tables away with friends from school, whose parents he'd invited without telling me. I remember smoothing my dress and thinking, just get through it. Then you can go home. He was already different. Not nervous, not distracted, focused, almost rehearsed. When the MC called his name, the room clapped politely. I did too, out of reflex. 20 years of reflex. He stood, adjusted his jacket, and smiled in a way I hadn't seen in months. Easy, confident, unburdened. He didn't look at me as he walked to the microphone. He started with jokes. The room warmed. He talked about leadership, loyalty, commitment, words that landed strangely in my chest. Then his tone shifted. Subtle, but I felt it before I understood it. I want to thank everyone who supported me through some recent changes, he said, glancing briefly toward the table where his department sat. Not toward me. It hasn't been easy navigating personal challenges while keeping professional standards intact. A ripple of murmurs moved through the room. I leaned forward, confused. Personal challenges? He cleared his throat. Sometimes you outgrow situations that no longer serve your future. And sometimes, he paused, letting the silence stretch. You have to make hard decisions for your own stability. People were watching him closely now. And then, finally, he looked at me. Not with guilt. Not with regret. With resolve. I won't be discussing private matters tonight, he continued, voice calm, controlled. But I do want to clarify something, since rumors tend to travel faster than facts. My stomach dropped. My wife and I are no longer living together. That was my decision. A sharp inhale cut through the room. Someone at the table beside me whispered my name. He kept going. I believe in honesty, and I won't pretend that a situation marked by emotional volatility can continue under my roof. For my sake, and for my daughter's, I had to draw a line. For a second, the room went utterly still. Not silent. Still. Like everyone collectively realized they were witnessing something they weren't supposed to. I felt heat rush to my face. My ears rang. Under his roof? Emotional volatility? He had just kicked me out of my own life. Publicly. Cleanly. Like a press release. I stood up. Chairs scraped. Heads turned. My daughter looked over. Eyes wide. Color draining from her face. I walked toward the stage. Every step felt unreal. Like the floor had shifted angles. He noticed me too late. Serena, he started, stepping back from the microphone. I took it from him. My hands were steady. That surprised me. I wasn't planning to speak, I said, my voice carrying easily in the stunned quiet. But since my marriage has just been summarized without my consent, I'll keep this brief. He shook his head slightly, warning me. I ignored it. 20 years ago, I married a man who valued privacy, I continued. Apparently, that value has changed. A few people shifted uncomfortably. Someone coughed. I was told tonight was about professional achievements. I didn't realize it was also a character assassination. His jaw tightened. You don't need to do this, he said quietly. I looked at him. Really looked. The man who had slept beside me for 2 decades. The man who had controlled every account, every narrative, every explanation. Oh, I do, I said. I turned back to the room. For clarity, I didn't leave my home. I was told to leave, and I didn't become unstable. I became inconvenient, Gasps this time, no whispers. And one more thing, I added, glancing toward the table where a woman sat frozen, eyes fixed on her folded hands. Younger, too polished, too alert. Stability built on deception doesn't last. Ask anyone who's tried. The woman didn't look up. My husband reached for the microphone again. I stepped back and handed it to the MC instead. I think that's enough, I said, turning away. As I walked past the tables, people avoided my eyes, or watched me like I was something newly dangerous. My daughter stood up and followed me without a word. I wrapped an arm around her shoulders as we moved toward the exit. Behind us, the room buzzed. Not applause, not condemnation. Shock. Outside, the cold hit my skin and cleared my head. I didn't cry. I didn't shake. I felt something else, something sharper. In the car, my daughter finally spoke. Did he really do that on purpose? Yes, I said. He did. She nodded once, jaw set in a way that told me she understood more than he ever gave her credit for. As I drove away from the hotel, I looked at the glowing windows in the rearview mirror and felt something settle inside me. He thought tonight ended me. He thought humiliation would make me disappear quietly. I tightened my grip on the steering wheel. He had no idea what he'd just started. When people talk about long marriages, they usually focus on the big moments. The wedding, the house, the child, the milestones that look good from the outside. What they don't talk about is erosion. I met my husband when I was 23. He was ambitious, careful with words, already thinking 5 moves ahead. I loved that about him. It made me feel safe. We married young by today's standards, built our life steadily, deliberately. No drama, no chaos, just plans. When I got pregnant, we agreed I would step back from my career temporarily. I was working in project coordination then. Nothing glamorous, but I was good at it. Temporary became years. Years became normal. I handled the invisible work, school forms, insurance calls, contractor bids, tax documents he didn't want to think about. I knew where every file was. I knew which accounts paid which bills. I knew what kept our life running. He liked to say he handled the finances. What that really meant was he had his name on everything. I had the passwords. Until one day I didn't. The house in Naperville was purchased 8 years into our marriage. We stretched to afford it. I remember telling him we should wait another year. He wanted it now, needed it to look successful. My parents helped with the down payment, quietly. A gift, not a loan. They wired the money to us, trusting me to protect it. I didn't insist on paperwork. That's what love does to you. Our daughter grew up thinking her father was strong and reliable and that her mother was simply there, present, constant. When she was sick, it was me. When she needed permission slips, rides, reassurance, it was me. He showed up for the visible things, games, ceremonies, photos. Somewhere along the way, I became background. The warning signs weren't explosive. They were subtle. He started traveling more, but with less detail. His phone stopped lighting up when he was in the room. He began using phrases like my house and my schedule, small corrections, delivered casually, as if reminding me of my place. I noticed the changes and talked myself out of them. He's stressed. This phase will pass. You don't throw away 20 years over a feeling. The first time I confronted him, gently, he laughed. Told me I was imagining things. Told me I needed to find something fulfilling so I wouldn't fixate on him. That word stayed with me. Fixate. I started feeling like a guest in my own life. Then came the financial shifts. Accounts I used for years suddenly required verification codes sent to his phone. Statements stopped arriving at the house. When I asked, he said it was for security. When I pushed, he told me I was being controlling. I backed off. Again. The night he kicked me out publicly wasn't spontaneous. Looking back, it was the final move in a strategy I didn't know I was playing against. The next morning, I went back to the house to collect clothes while he was at work. The bedroom felt staged, drawers too neat, surfaces cleared. On the bathroom counter, I found a hair tie that wasn't mine. Not my color, not my brand. My chest tightened, but I didn't cry. I called my sister. She didn't ask questions. She told me to sit down and listen. "He's been seen," she said carefully. "Not once. Not recently." The confirmation landed heavier than the discovery would have. This wasn't a mistake. It wasn't confusion. It was a parallel life. Later that afternoon, my daughter came home from school early. She didn't say hello. She put her backpack down slowly, like she was bracing herself. "Mom," she said, "I need to tell you something." She told me about the woman she'd seen in our driveway weeks earlier, about how her father introduced her as a colleague, about the way he'd asked her not to mention it to me to avoid unnecessary stress. I listened without interrupting, without reacting. When she finished, she looked at me with a mix of fear and loyalty that broke something open inside my chest. "I knew it wasn't right," she said. "I just didn't know what to do." I pulled her into my arms and held her longer than I had in years. That was the moment denial ended. This wasn't just about betrayal between spouses. This was about control, about rewriting history, about removing me from the story while keeping everything I helped build. And if I did nothing, if I stayed quiet, if I accepted the narrative he'd started to sell, I wouldn't just lose my marriage. I would lose my daughter's trust, my parents' sacrifice, my own name. I stood in that house, surrounded by a life I'd maintained but no longer owned, and made myself a promise. He had underestimated me. That was going to cost him everything. I didn't rage. I didn't spiral. I didn't sit in shock, replaying the past. I got organized. That surprised even me. The morning after my daughter told me the truth, I woke up before sunrise at my sister's house, fully alert, like my body had been waiting for permission to move. I made coffee, opened my laptop, and started listing everything I knew. Accounts, property records, insurance policies, dates, amounts. 20 years of invisible labor finally had a purpose. By 9 a.m., I had already called a divorce attorney. Not one of those flashy billboard lawyers. I wanted someone precise, calm, ruthless in a quiet way. A woman who listened without interrupting and didn't ask me how I felt. Only what I wanted protected. "My priority is my daughter," I said, "and what I helped build." She nodded once. Then we moved fast. That word again. Move. By noon, she had instructed me to open a new bank account in my name only. I did it online from the kitchen table, my hands steady. I transferred exactly what I was legally entitled to. No more, no less. I documented everything. Next came the credit cards. 2 were joint. I froze them. 1 was in my name but paid from a shared account. I redirected the payments. I felt no guilt. I felt clarity. At 2 p.m., I went back to the house. I didn't announce myself. I let myself in with the spare key I'd never given back. I packed strategically, documents first, then essentials, birth certificates, passports, tax returns, jewelry my parents had given me, the things that couldn't be replaced. I didn't touch anything sentimental. That chapter was closed. In the closet, I found a garment bag I didn't recognize. Inside was a tailored jacket with a dry cleaning tag dated from the week he claimed to be traveling alone. I took a photo and left it where it was. Evidence doesn't need emotion. Before leaving, I stood in the living room and took a long look around. I remembered every upgrade, every contractor meeting, every budget conversation where I had been told to trust him. I emailed the realtor who had originally sold us the house. Short message, professional. "I'm exploring options. Discretion is important." She responded within minutes. At 4:30, my attorney called back. "We've filed for temporary financial restraints," she said. "He won't be able to move money without it being flagged." I leaned back in the chair and exhaled slowly. By the time my daughter came home from school, the house we'd lived in for 8 years was no longer something he could weaponize against me. That night, I told her the truth. Not everything, but enough. "I'm handling it," I said. "You're safe." You don't have to choose sides. She looked at me carefully, then nodded. I choose you anyway. That was fuel. The first message from him came at 7:12 p.m. We need to talk. You're overreacting. I didn't reply. The second came 10 minutes later. Freezing accounts is extreme. Still nothing. At 8:03 he called. I watched the phone ring until it stopped. I wasn't avoiding him, I was repositioning. At 9 my attorney emailed again. He attempted to access a joint line of credit. It was blocked. I smiled for the first time in days. The next morning he showed up at my sister's house. He didn't knock. He rang the bell repeatedly, hard enough that the sound echoed through the hallway. I opened the door calmly and stepped outside, closing it behind me. You have no right, he started. Do you have any idea what you've done? Yes, I said. I've taken control. His face shifted. Confusion first, then something like alarm. This isn't how this goes, he said. You don't just move money, call lawyers. You're making this ugly. I met his eyes. You made it public. I made it precise. For the first time, he didn't have a response ready. That was when I knew. He had expected tears. Negotiation. Delay. What he got instead was momentum. And I wasn't slowing down. The consequences didn't arrive all at once. They spread outward, quiet and fast, like cracks under pressure. By the end of the first week, his routines started breaking down. The joint cards declined at a client dinner. Not dramatically, no alarms, no scenes, but long enough for a waiter to hesitate and for someone at the table to notice. He laughed it off, blamed a bank error, but he checked his phone 3 times before dessert. The next morning, his assistant emailed him about a delayed reimbursement. The corporate account was intact, but his personal flexibility, the cushion he used for image maintenance, was gone. The quiet perks, the polished ease. He called me again. I didn't answer. At work, questions began surfacing, not accusations. Curiosity. People who had been at the event replayed his speech in their heads, now paired with the fact that I hadn't folded, hadn't disappeared, hadn't quietly moved back in. Silence creates suspicion. By midweek, his department knew we weren't amicably separating. The language shifted. Fewer friendly check-ins. Fewer invitations. Men who once lingered in his office doorway now kept conversations brief. Stability is a currency. Once it wobbles, everything costs more. The woman, the one he had tried to fold into his life without consequence, felt it next. She stopped posting. Her online presence went still, like someone holding their breath. A mutual acquaintance reached out to me quietly, not for gossip, but for confirmation. I just want to be sure I'm not crazy, she said. He told her you were unstable, that you'd left on your own. I sent her one sentence. I was asked to leave in front of witnesses. The message was read. No reply. But the ripple traveled. By Friday, the woman had stopped returning his calls. She didn't block him, blocking invites escalation. She simply became unavailable. Meetings canceled. Messages delayed. Plans indefinitely postponed. He showed up at my sister's house again that weekend. This time, he looked tired. You're enjoying this, he said, standing too close. Turning people against me. I'm not turning anyone, I said. I'm not talking at all. That's worse, he snapped. People are filling in the gaps. He wasn't wrong. My parents came to see me that afternoon. They didn't raise their voices. They didn't demand explanations. They brought documents. The wire transfer receipt from 8 years ago. The gift letter. The email trail. My father slid the folder across the table. You'll need this. He hadn't called my husband. Not once. That silence carried weight. The same evening, my attorney forwarded me a copy of a notice. My husband had tried to refinance the house. Not to sell. To regain leverage. It failed. Temporary restraints had already locked him out. Is there anything else I should expect? I asked. Yes, she said. Desperation. It arrived right on time. Late Sunday night, he sent a long message. Not angry. Not apologetic. Strategic. We can still handle this privately. Think about our daughter. This doesn't need to turn into something ugly. I stared at the screen for a long moment before responding. Not to him, but to my attorney. Proceed. Monday morning, papers were filed. By Tuesday, his brother stopped answering his calls. By Wednesday, his father requested a meeting. With me. We sat in a quiet cafe, the kind my husband had never liked because it wasn't impressive enough. His father didn't defend him. He didn't ask for reconciliation. He made a mess, he said simply. And he involved the child. I nodded. That was a mistake, he continued. One I won't excuse. Support withdrawn doesn't announce itself. It just vanishes. The final shift came when my daughter told me something small, almost casually. He asked me if you'd talk to him, she said. I said no. I looked at her. Did he say anything else? She shook her head. He just looked scared. That word stayed with me. He had thought control was permanent, that money, narrative, and silence were interchangeable. Now, none of them were answering him. And for the first time since I'd met him, my husband was alone inside a story he could no longer manage. That was only the beginning. The second confrontation wasn't planned the way people imagine revenge scenes are planned. I didn't wake up thinking, today is the day I humiliate him again. I woke up knowing he was going to try to reclaim the story, and that if I stayed silent this time, the lie would harden. The setting made the choice for me. It was a charity luncheon hosted by one of his company's largest clients. High visibility, public seating, phones everywhere. The kind of event where reputation mattered more than money. He was listed as a speaker, again. I was listed as a guest. He didn't expect me to show. I arrived 10 minutes late on purpose. The room was already settled when I walked in. White tablecloths, low conversation, familiar faces that stiffened when they saw me. I caught my husband's expression from across the room, the flicker of disbelief, followed by calculation. And then I saw her. She sat 2 seats from him, close enough to touch his arm, far enough to pretend neutrality. Perfect posture, neutral dress. A woman trying to look uninvolved while very much being involved. I took my seat quietly. He went up to speak. This time, he didn't mention me directly. He didn't need to. He spoke about resilience, about navigating personal transitions with grace, about protecting children from conflict. It was polished, sanitized, carefully crafted to make me sound unreasonable without ever saying my name. People nodded. People listened. Then he thanked the organizers and stepped down to polite applause. That's when the moderator smiled and said, "Before we move on, we've had a request for a brief clarification." The room shifted. She looked at him. He frowned slightly. My name was called. I stood. I didn't rush. I didn't smile. I walked to the front and accepted the microphone like it belonged to me, because in that moment it did. "I won't take long," I said. "I just want to correct the record." You could feel the phones come out without seeing them. "My husband has spoken about grace and privacy," I continued evenly. "So let me be very clear. I didn't leave my marriage. I didn't abandon my family. I was removed, publicly, while another relationship was already in progress." A murmur rolled through the room. I turned slightly, not pointing, not accusing, just allowing lines of sight to do the work. "The reason this matters isn't emotion," I said. "It's honesty." I paused. Let it land. When someone asks you to stay quiet so they can look dignified, what they're really asking is for you to carry their shame for them. His face had gone pale now, not shocked, exposed. I lowered the microphone slightly and delivered the line I hadn't rehearsed, but had carried with me since the night he tried to erase me. "I won't be responsible for protecting a reputation that required my silence to survive." The room froze. Someone near the front whispered, "Oh." I handed the microphone back to the moderator, nodded once and turned to leave. I didn't look at my husband, but I didn't have to. The sound followed me, the scrape of chairs, the low buzz of voices rising all at once. Outside the doors, my phone began vibrating before I'd even reached the hallway. Behind me, I heard a voice. Tight. Controlled. "We should go," he said. Not to me, to her. I turned just in time to see her stand, and then stop. She didn't reach for his arm. She didn't follow. She leaned in and said something I couldn't hear. Then she picked up her bag and walked away in the opposite direction. Alone. That image traveled faster than anything I could have said. By the time I reached my car, messages were already coming in. Short ones. Careful ones. People asking if I was okay. People saying they hadn't known. People saying, "I saw it." Inside the luncheon hall, my husband stood rooted, surrounded by witnesses who now understood the full shape of the lie he'd been telling. This time, there was no speech to smooth it over. No exit strategy. No woman at his side. Only a man exposed in public, watching the story turn without him. And everyone saw exactly who had lost control. The backlash didn't explode the way scandals do in movies. It tightened. Within hours of the luncheon, the narrative my husband had been nursing for weeks began to fail under its own weight. People didn't rush to condemn him. They did something far more dangerous. They compared notes. A clipped video of my statement circulated first. Not posted by me, but by someone who thought they were being helpful. It wasn't dramatic. No shouting. No tears. Just a woman standing straight and refusing to carry someone else's shame. That restraint made it impossible to dismiss. Comments didn't swarm. They stacked. That doesn't sound like a bitter spouse. If he asked her to stay quiet, there's more to this. I was there. The room went cold. By the next morning, his inbox was full of polite inquiries disguised as professional concern. A client asked if everything was settling down. A colleague suggested he take a few days to focus on personal matters. HR sent a calendar invite with no agenda. He called me at 6:47 a.m. I didn't answer. He tried again at 7:03. Then came the message. "You knew this would turn into a spectacle. You're damaging people who didn't do anything to you." I read it twice before replying with my first message to him in days. I told the truth once. Everything else is a reaction. That was when he panicked. He started reaching out. To mutual friends, to extended family, to anyone who might still believe his version if delivered quickly enough. He framed himself as overwhelmed, confused, blindsided by a wife who had changed. But something had shifted. People didn't argue with him. They didn't reassure him. They asked questions. Why hadn't I been informed before the public announcement? Why had finances been locked down without transparency? Why had our daughter been instructed to keep secrets? He didn't have clean answers. By Wednesday, screenshots started circulating. Not leaked by me, but unearthed by people who had once trusted him. Old messages where he'd referred to me as volatile. Emails where he implied I was unpredictable. None of it criminal. None of it dramatic. All of it unnecessary. The woman he'd been seeing finally broke her silence. Not publicly, but decisively. She sent him a single message. "I can't be involved in this." No explanation. No argument. She disappeared from his life the way people do when they realize proximity will cost them more than distance. That same afternoon, my attorney forwarded me something unexpected. A colleague of his, someone senior, had reached out discreetly. Not to offer support. To ask for clarification. "I want to be careful," the message read. "But I need to know if there are documents or communications that contradict the narrative he's been presenting internally." I didn't respond. I forwarded it. Let professionals do professional damage. By Friday, the situation was no longer private. A local industry blog published a short, carefully worded piece about leadership credibility during personal crises. It didn't name him. It didn't need to. Anyone in his circle knew exactly who it was about. The comments were turned off. That's how you know it landed. He showed up unannounced again that night. This time, he didn't yell. He didn't posture. He looked smaller. "You're letting them destroy me," he said, standing in the driveway like a stranger. "This is getting out of hand." I folded my arms. "You said you wanted privacy. That's not what I meant." "I know," I said. You wanted control. He flinched. Say something, he pleaded. Tell people it's complicated. Tell them I'm not this person. I studied him for a long moment. You built your reputation on my silence, I said. Now you're asking me to restore it. That's not fair. No, I agreed. It's accurate. He left without another word. The next wave hit over the weekend. A former employee of his, someone he'd dismissed years ago, shared a vague post about watching patterns repeat. It wasn't about me. It wasn't even clearly about him. But people connected it. Pattern recognition is brutal. By Monday morning, his company placed him on temporary leave to avoid distraction. The phrasing was generous. The implication wasn't. He lost his access badge that afternoon. Not permanently, not publicly. Just enough. That was when the final receipt surfaced. A timeline. Someone, still unknown to me, compiled dates, travel schedules, conference locations, overlapping work trips, and unexplained absences. It didn't accuse. It didn't editorialize. It simply aligned facts. The post ended with a sentence that spread faster than anything else. If the truth threatens your stability, it was never stable to begin with. He didn't respond publicly after that. There was nothing left to spin. The story had moved beyond him, beyond me even, and settled into something colder and more permanent. Credibility doesn't shatter. It erodes until there's nothing left to stand on. And when it finally collapses, no amount of explanation can rebuild it. He learned that too late. And I didn't have to lift another finger. The legal dismantling didn't feel dramatic while it was happening. It felt methodical. Once the filings were in motion, the noise fell away. No more speeches, no more narratives. Just documents, timelines, and consequences that didn't care how convincing he sounded in a room. The first ruling came quickly. Temporary custody granted to me. Not because I asked for it theatrically, but because the facts were clean. Stability. Primary caregiver. A child who didn't hesitate when asked where she felt safe. He didn't contest it at first. His attorney advised against it. Fighting custody when you've already been exposed for manipulation doesn't play well in front of a judge. The house followed. The down payment documentation my parents had preserved changed everything. What he'd treated as leverage turned into liability. The court didn't need drama, just proof. He tried to argue intent. The judge asked for records. Intent collapsed. The property was ordered to be sold. Proceeds split in a way that finally reflected reality, not performance. He lost access immediately. I gained time. Then came the accounts. What he'd once controlled quietly was now itemized publicly. Retirement funds. Investment accounts. Deferred compensation he'd assumed was untouchable. They weren't. Every freeze, every restriction, every redirected deposit landed like a small cut. Not fatal on its own. Cumulative enough to bleed him out. The woman he'd risked everything for didn't resurface. When subpoenas reached her workplace, routine, procedural, she panicked. Not because she'd done anything illegal, but because proximity to his collapse threatened her own standing. She resigned within a week. I didn't hear it from him. I heard it from someone else. That's how far removed I was by then. Family fallout arrived quietly. His brother stopped returning calls entirely. No confrontation, just absence. His father sent one final message. Not to me. To him. Handle the consequences of your decisions. After that, support evaporated. No bridge loans, no quiet rescues, no family-backed safety net. For the first time in his life, he had to stand on his own reputation. It wasn't enough. By the time mediation ended, his legal fees had eaten through most of what he'd tried to protect. His leave from work turned indefinite. His title meant nothing without credibility to support it. He moved out of his rental after missing 2 payments. I didn't find out immediately. I found out later, when his address changed on a document. A temporary place. Shared. Unremarkable. Isolation doesn't announce itself. It accumulates. The final hearing was short. No speeches. No accusations. Just signatures. When the judge looked at us, she didn't see a dramatic story. She saw a pattern she'd seen before, a man who confused control for partnership, and a woman who finally stopped cooperating. Walking out of that building, I felt lighter than I had in years. Not victorious. Free. My daughter took my hand in the parking lot. "Is it done?" she asked. "Yes," I said, "it's done." She smiled, not relieved, but steady. Behind us, he stood alone on the steps, looking smaller than I remembered him ever being. Not because he'd lost money, but because he'd lost the audience he'd built his life around. There was nothing left to say to him, and nothing left for him to take. The last time we met, it wasn't dramatic. No crowd, no microphones, no witnesses waiting to decide who was right. Just two people sitting across from each other in a small conference room that smelled faintly of stale coffee and disinfectant. He had asked for the meeting through his attorney. Not demanded. Asked. That alone told me everything I needed to know. I agreed on one condition. 30 minutes, doors open, attorneys outside. No negotiations, no revisions, no attempts to reopen anything already closed. When I walked in, he was already there. He stood when he saw me, then hesitated, like he wasn't sure he still had the right. His jacket was wrinkled. His hair was thinner than I remembered. The man who once filled rooms now barely filled the chair. "Thank you for coming," he said. I sat down without replying. For a moment, he just looked at me. Not with anger, not with entitlement, with something closer to fear. "I didn't think it would end like this," he said finally. I folded my hands on the table. "You didn't think it would end at all." He swallowed. "I made mistakes." That word, mistakes. Always plural, always vague, never owned. "You didn't make mistakes," I said calmly. "You made choices." He flinched at that. "Good." "I never wanted to hurt you," he said quickly. "I never meant for it to get out of control." I leaned back slightly. "You announced the end of our marriage in public and removed me from my home without warning. That wasn't— You don't get to revise that," I cut in. "Not here." He nodded, eyes dropping to the table. I was angry. I felt cornered. "No," I said. "You felt exposed." He looked up then. Really looked. "I lost everything," he said. "My job, my family, my reputation. I don't even recognize my life." I studied him, noticing how carefully he avoided the word, "you." "What do you want from me?" I asked. He hesitated too long. "Help," he said finally. "Just something. A statement, a clarification. People listen to you now. If you said it was mutual or complicated or—" "No," I said. The word landed cleanly. No heat, no softness. He blinked. "I'm not asking you to lie." "You are," I said. "You're asking me to blur the truth so you can stand up straighter." He leaned forward, desperation bleeding through his composure. "I'll do anything. Apologize publicly, privately, however you want it." "You already apologized," I said. "You just didn't change." "That's not fair." I met his eyes. "Fair left the room the night you decided humiliation was an acceptable exit strategy." Silence stretched between us. "You don't understand what it's like," he said quietly. "To wake up and realize no one is coming to help you." I didn't respond right away. Not because I didn't understand, but because I did. "I understand exactly what that's like," I said. "I lived it inside our marriage for years." His mouth opened, closed. "I supported your career, your image, your comfort," I continued. "I absorbed your stress, your distance, your dismissals. And when I finally became inconvenient, you tried to erase me. That wasn't my intention. It was the outcome," I said. "Intent doesn't undo damage." He pressed his fingers into his temples. "So that's it? You just walk away?" I smiled slightly, not with satisfaction, with finality. "I already did." He shook his head, voice cracking. "We built something together. Doesn't that count for anything?" It does, I said. It counts as proof that I can build again. He looked at me like that hadn't occurred to him. Serena, he said, using my name like a last card. Please. I stood. He looked up at me, panic flickering across his face. Wait, just tell me one thing. I paused, hand on the back of the chair. Was it worth it? He asked. Everything you did. I considered the question carefully. Yes, I said, because I didn't destroy you. He frowned, confused. I stopped protecting you, I finished. Understanding hit him slowly, painfully. I picked up my bag. You don't need my forgiveness, I said as I walked toward the door. You needed my silence. And you lost it. His voice followed me, small now. I never thought you'd be this cold. I stopped and turned back one last time. I'm not cold, I said. I'm done. Then I opened the door and stepped into the hallway, where my attorney waited, already gathering her things. As we walked away, I didn't look back. Some endings don't need witnesses. They just need resolve. And I had more than enough. A year later, my life doesn't look dramatic. That's the point. I wake up in a quiet house that feels like mine. Not impressive, not curated for anyone else's approval, just steady. Sunlight through the kitchen window. Coffee I drink slowly instead of gulping between obligations. Mornings where my shoulders aren't already tight before the day begins. I didn't rebuild overnight. I rebuilt deliberately. I went back to work, not to prove anything, but because I wanted my own momentum again. I chose something adjacent to what I'd always been good at. Operations, coordination, systems. The same skills I'd used invisibly for 2 decades now had my name on them. It felt strange at first, introducing myself without referencing someone else. My daughter adjusted faster than I expected. She grew quieter in the beginning, then steadier. Her grades didn't suffer. Her confidence sharpened. She stopped apologizing for things that weren't her fault. When people asked about her father, she answered calmly and changed the subject. No anger. No embarrassment. Clarity does that. We developed small rituals, Sunday walks, late-night conversations that didn't feel rushed. I watched her learn in real time that love doesn't require self-erasure. That mattered more to me than any victory. As for him, he faded. Not suddenly, gradually. Like a sound that recedes until you're not sure when it stopped. Mutual friends stopped mentioning him. Invitations came without his name attached. Updates arrived secondhand, then not at all. The last thing I heard was that he'd taken contract work in another city. Short-term, temporary. The kind of job you accept when permanence has stopped being available to you. I didn't feel satisfaction when I heard that. I felt distance. And distance is the real end. The house sold. I downsized, simplified. I didn't keep what reminded me of managing someone else's expectations. I kept what felt useful, light, honest. Sometimes people ask me how I stayed so composed through everything, how I didn't break. I always give the same answer. I broke earlier. I broke quietly, in small ways, over years of minimizing myself to keep something intact that was already hollow. By the time the public betrayal happened, there wasn't much left to shatter. What surprised me wasn't my resilience. It was my relief. I didn't miss him. I missed who I thought I had been when I believed loyalty was mutual. Letting go of that illusion hurt more than letting go of the marriage itself. But illusions don't build futures. Agency does. I learned something important through all of this. Something I wish I'd known sooner. Betrayal doesn't just reveal who someone else is. It reveals how much power you've been giving away without realizing it. And once you see that clearly, you don't unsee it. I don't tell my story as a warning. I tell it as proof. You can be removed from a narrative and still reclaim your life. You can be underestimated and still outgrow the person who did it. You can lose what you thought was everything and discover that what remains is finally yours. I didn't win because he lost. I won because I stopped shrinking to make room for someone who was already gone. That's what freedom looks like. Quiet, grounded, unapologetic, and entirely my own. Thank you for staying with me until the end of this story. If this resonated with you in any way, click the hype button and let me know you felt it too. I'd really love to hear your thoughts, or even your own experience, in the comments. You never know who might need to read it. And if stories like this matter to you, make sure to hit subscribe and the like button so you don't miss what's coming next. Your support truly means more than you think.